In May of 1860, the nation's attention turned toward Chicago, where the Republicans were meeting to select their presidential candidate. The candidates were William H. Seward, the Republican frontrunner from New York, Pennsylvania's candidate Simon Cameron, Ohio's Salmon P. Chase, and fellow Ohioans Senator Ben Wade and Judge John McLean, along with Missouri's Edwin Bates and a few other minor candidates, and Abraham Lincoln of Illinois. It took 3 ballots for the convention to finally nominate Lincoln when D.K. Catter of Ohio announced a change of 4 votes from Mr. Chase to Abraham Lincoln, and the crowd roared. Back in Winona, the excitement of the campaign was picking up. On July 19, 1860, the Winona Daily Republican ran this notice of the Republican Convention in St. Paul. Lincoln had a very human nature that enabled him to connect with others on a very personal level. During his campaign, Grace Bedell, a young girl of 11, wrote Mr. Lincoln,
"Have you any little girls about as large as I am? If so, give them my love and tell her to write to me if you cannot answer this letter. I have got 4 brothers, and part of them will vote for you anyway, and if you will let your whiskers grow, I will try and get the rest of them to vote for you. You would look a great deal better, for your face is so thin. All the ladies like whiskers, and they will tease their husbands to vote for you, and then you would be president."
And he wrote back this candid and friendly response.
Miss Grace Bedell, my dear little miss, your very agreeable letter of the 15th is received. I regret the necessity of saying I have no daughters. I have 3 sons, one 17, one 9, and one 7 years of age. They, with their mother, constitute my whole family. As to the whiskers, having never worn any, do you not think people would call it a piece of silly affection if I were to begin it now? Your very sincere well-wisher, A. Lincoln.
And Abe did grow a beard. Elected as the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln received a majority of the Minnesota votes, along with 40% of the popular vote, enough to defeat the other 3 candidates, Southern Democrat John C. Breckinridge, Constitutional Union candidate John Bell, and Northern Democrat Stephen Douglas. Lincoln's inaugural address was a plea for patience and a willingness to take some time to work out a solution that could be accepted by all. The conclusion to Lincoln's first inaugural speech has become a well-known statement of his hope for tolerance from the southern states.
I am loath to close. We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature.
However, by the time of Lincoln's inauguration on March 4, 1861, 7 states had seceded and the Confederate States of America had been formally established with Jefferson Davis as its president. The first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, and news of the fort's surrender was quickly telegraphed to Washington. On April 13, 1861, a day after the shots fired on Fort Sumter started the Civil War, Minnesota Governor Alexander Ramsey tendered 1,000 Minnesotans to aid the national defense. News of the governor's commitment quickly reached Winona, where the community wasted no time mustering a fine batch of recruits. Alonzo Pickle, Joseph Perriam, Charles North, James Raymer, John Ball, Matthew Marvin, and by April 20th, 72 men had signed on and were on their way to become Company K of the 1st Minnesota Regiment. Charles Goddard, only 15 years old, signed on, but he was found out and not allowed to join the company because of his age. Charlie was a determined fellow, and he snuck along to Fort Snelling, where amidst the confusion, he was mustered into Company K on April 29th, and he celebrated his 16th birthday on May 14th. His mother, Catherine, supported his efforts and wrote a poem in his honor.
Each added year came with a voice unlike the former one, and whispered to my yearning soul bright hopes for thee, my son. Today the voice is holier, for the sweet words say in me, thy brave boy is a soldier now, in the war for liberty.
Charlie was a pretty faithful correspondent and often wrote his mother. This is from his first letter home.
I felt on that night we left Winona as if I could fight for my country in that beautiful capital on yonder hill. I went all through it and saw pictures of all the great men and the statue of George Washington. There's a good deal of excitement in the camps around here. Men are picked off by the enemy every 2 or 3 nights. The truth of it is, I would like to be in a little more danger, where I could have some chance at some secession soldiers and finish the job and go home to old Winona again.
And after Bull Run, he wrote,
there was a man shot by one of our sharpshooters while we were across the river, and in his pocket was found a letter, wrote probably by some thoughtless young girl, asking him to shoot a Yankee and send her his scalp. But alas, he was the one to fall.
Matthew Marvin was another of the Winona volunteers. He came to Winona in 1859 and worked as a clerk at J.J. Randall and Company, a leather goods store. Matthew's pay in 1862 was $13 a month, and of this he sent $8 home to his mother. Matthew reminisced about the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yes, I remember distinctly the particulars of the Battle of Gettysburg. 262 against 6,000 or 7,000. The 1st Minnesota began firing and stopped the advance of the first line of rebels. Those in the rear of the rebel line rushed forward, falling over their own men. They were pushed together into a solid mass so that every shot fired by the 1st did its work. The 1st was lying down. So much of the shot fired went over our heads. We could hear the steady tramp of feet in the rear and the rattling of tin cups as reinforcements came up.
As the war wore on, it became more burdensome for everyone. Lincoln was elected for a 2nd term, and his inaugural address has become a historical classic. This speech has been widely acknowledged as one of the most remarkable documents in American history.
With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphans, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Back in Winona, while the city grew and prospered, the families of the soldiers anxiously awaited news from the Winona boys. And as the casualties mounted, everyone began to tire of the war. Lincoln also felt the strain and was burdened by the sacrifices being made for this great cause. In November of 1864, he wrote to a mother who had lost 5 sons in the war.
I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Yours, very sincerely and respectfully, A. Lincoln.
The war finally came to a close with the surrender at Appomattox on April 9, 1865. And a few days later, a large crowd gathered outside the White House calling for President Lincoln. No one knew that this was to be his last public address, and it has been seen as the cause of the ire of John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln opened his last public address.
We meet this evening not in sorrow but in gladness of heart. The evacuation of Petersburg and Richmond and the surrender of the principal insurgent army give hope of a righteous and speedy peace whose joyous expressions cannot be restrained. In the midst of this, however, he from whom all blessings flow must not be forgotten.
John Wilkes Booth was so enraged by Lincoln's support of the right of blacks to vote that he vowed that is the last speech he will make. And 3 days later, he made good on his pledge. Lincoln's tragic death rocked the country, and the news quickly spread to Winona. Thus, a major chapter in our history came to a close. Winona's contributions to the Civil War effort have not been forgotten, and we are proud to honor their memory.
We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.